Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. It's an absolute thrill to be with you today. It's well, in English terms, it's roasting right now. It's got to be about 28 degrees centigrade. I'm not sure what that is in Fahrenheit. Maybe in the late 80s, early 90s, perhaps early 90s. But we're cooking here. We're not used to this warm weather, so it's a nice change from the English grey skies. So I've got a really interesting subject today. I mentioned it in on my Facebook post, my reminder, that I wanted to talk about perceptions versus realities, and in particular, how we as business leaders can work with our team members when perhaps their perception might not be the reality. Sometime, or maybe with ourselves, maybe we might be experiencing a particular challenge in achieving a goal or an aspiration, and be wondering why we're not getting it. And maybe we might interpret the response incorrectly. So I wanted to talk about that today because I do think that this is a very relevant subject and perhaps a timely one as well. So, as always, I have some slides in this instance to be able to share with each of you today. So I'm mindful that not everyone is on via video, so I hope that this will still make sense nonetheless. So I wanted to talk about, as we can see here, perception versus reality. I love this example of the glass that is half full with two fish in it. One is facing upwards without the water covering its face. The other one facing down with his face in the water. The first one, I'm saying this on behalf of the guests on the call today that don't have video. The one with his face out of the water is saying, whoa, half empty, definitely half empty. Whereas the other one is saying, just listen to you, always the pessimist. It really is a matter of perception, isn't it? And where we might be at any particular time. So I've got a couple of examples here that are just humorous ways where perception isn't always reality. I love this one on the top left. May your life someday be as awesome as you pretend it is on Facebook. That certainly seems to be a true scenario, doesn't it? Social media has a great way of crafting the best version of life to share with the public. Of course, I like this. I also like this one with the parents, perception versus reality, where you've got the mother lying ever so peacefully with a restful sleeping baby, looking ever so relaxed, whereas the reality is the baby's lying horizontal with his foot in the mother's face, and she's on the end of the bed. I relate to that far too many nights, I assure you. So there are some fun things where we can look at perception as deliberately not reality. Maybe it's, like I said, the social media scenario, or it might be, perhaps, we choose to believe something different because it's more convenient. Or we don't consider it that big a deal if we bury our head in the sand, for example, and call the truth something slightly different. However, there are some situations, and I'll stop the sharing for just a second, there are some situations where it might, with all intents and purposes, genuinely look like reality is something that it is not. And we can be perplexed by it, it can challenge us, and as a consequence, it can influence our choices or our behavior in a negative way. So let me give you an example here to highlight this. Now this might look a little scientific at first, but I assure you it's not. So this image comes from a type of therapy, it's associated with logotherapy, which is all about healing through meaning. That's the whole purpose of logotherapy. But this dimensional ontology, what it means is that things that can sometimes appear to contradict each other might not always contradict each other. For example, if we look at this image on the left, we see to the left the shadow of the cylinder creates a rectangle if the light is coming from right to left. But if the light is coming downwards, then the shadow creates a circle. Now, depending on which way you're looking at this, it could seem that those two shadows contradict each other when you try to define the source. it might not look like it makes sense. The other example here on the right, number 2, we have 3 different images: a cylinder, a sphere, and a triangle here. Now, each of them will create the same pattern on the bottom. As you can see, as the light shines down, you see a shadow. But, of course, they each represent 3 very different shapes. And, of course, we don't know, simply by looking at this, if the cylinder is actually full or empty. Now, theoretically, if I put this into an emotional context, if I was standing under that cylinder, I might feel like a shadow is cast over my life. But in fact, there might be a cylinder above me that is full of blessings and great opportunities that are about to be poured out. But all I feel and all I see might be the shadow. Does that make sense? Now, why do I share this? I share this because the context of explanation is found in looking at a different dimension. Meaning, if we put this into our personal circumstances versus into shapes and images and shadows, what it means is that sometimes the meaning of a struggle, of adversity, or perhaps of a complex challenge may not always dwell in the same dimension as the symptoms. It may hide in a different dimension. What we need is a dimensional diagnosis. Now, what do I mean by dimensions in this context? Let me stop the screen for just a second. What do I mean by this when I talk about different dimensions? What I mean is sometimes there are lower thoughts. There are different grades of thought, I believe. And sometimes we can have higher levels of thinking versus lower levels of thinking. But we need to make sure, in order to get context to a situation that is perhaps difficult or challenging, that we make sure that we have a higher level of thinking. We employ the higher dimensions of thought and feeling to get proper understanding. Now, I hope this isn't sounding too complicated or too philosophical. I share all this for a reason, because for many of us, as we're building our business, whether we're brand new or whether we're lifelong Nikonites, we can have experiences that can challenge us, that can seem out of the ordinary, that can seem in conflict with our goals or our vision or our expectations. Perhaps as a business leader, we might have someone that we've sponsored that may have a particular experience that they're struggling to understand, and as a consequence of that, they think, maybe this is not for me. Maybe I should go elsewhere. Maybe I should step back and do something different. And I would suggest that if we have our shoulder to the wheel and we're working diligently in our business, especially over a prolonged period of time, that these moments would come to each of us. If they didn't come to each of us, we may not find that we are as engaged as we might believe we are. I think this is really important. Dave shares a thought here, and of course I had that verse in mind. My thoughts are not your thoughts, and my ways are not your ways. For my ways are higher than yours, and my thoughts are higher than your thoughts. It's definitely very true there, Dave. So I want to go back to sharing my screen then and put to you some questions of some contradictions that we might experience that are in fact not necessarily contradictions at all. So here are some particular challenges or some lines of thought, some veins of thought that we might find we pursue when in reality it might be going down the wrong path. And I'll share with you, of course, my interpretation, and I might be quoting some others too, of course, in what those explanations should be. So first one, if I experience emotional homeostasis, I will be happy. What is emotional homeostasis? This means that if I experience some type of prolonged equilibrium. Now, we teach all about having balance in our lives, don't we? But the reality is, as we get balance through the 5 pillars of health, that does not mean that it is maintained or sustained indefinitely forever, because that would be unrealistic. The reality is, it is a constant game of seeking balance. The pursuit of getting balance in the 5 pillars isn't something that we experience as a singular event. It is a journey, it is a pursuit. And we constantly find we need to adjust one or the other to make sure that we get balance through the different circumstances that we find ourselves in. Now, what I call motivational theorists, I see this a lot on the internet, on social media. I'm sure many of you might too, where people are talking about trying to motivate and inspire others by offering them the luxury of equilibrium in their life, where they can enjoy a life without difficulty, without stress, without tension, without conflict. And they suggest that that is the result of a successful life. Maybe they show themselves sitting on a beach, living the good life, saying that this is what life is all about. And we envy it, we covet it perhaps, and we go, that is what life is all about, I want that. Perhaps what I'm doing right now is the wrong thing. However, here's an interesting concept. Biologically speaking, equilibrium is not something that a healthy state pursues. In fact, it's only when our body is in a state of disease that we actually are intent, biologically speaking, of avoiding tension. It is our nature, interestingly enough, paradoxically perhaps, to not strive for equilibrium, but to actually resist it. Our body's nature is actually to maintain tension versus to reduce it. Isn't that interesting? Perhaps we can see this in a very candid way with gravity. That applies a certain degree of tension on our bodies. It keeps us grounded, doesn't it? It keeps us on the earth. If we were to remove that tension, what would happen? Well, not a lot. We'd float off and we would struggle. The next question, or the next statement, the next contradiction perhaps. If I pursue success, if I pursue happiness, I will find it. I say this in the context of when I'm speaking to people and asking them what their goals are when they start building a Nikken business. When you're seeking to pursue a successful Nikken business, what are you striving for? What are your goals? Sometimes people are seeking success in and of itself, that is the end. Now, it's interesting. I quote here from Viktor Frankl. He said, they must happen, talking about success and happiness, but the less we care about them, the more they can. I really like that. Let me say that again. Success and happiness must happen, but the less we care about them, the more they can. Pleasure, he said, is the effect of achieving fulfillment. If we pursue it, we don't find meaning. Meaning, if we pursue pleasure for pleasure's sake, we might have a happy moment, but we don't find meaning as a consequence. Likewise, he says, with power, for example, financial power, it's a means to an end, not an end in itself. Meaning, financial means can help us to achieve our meaning, but it should not be the meaning of our lives. So, that being said, how often have we heard when we're helping people to set goals, heard people say, my goal is to make X amount of dollars per month. And we pursue financial means as a means in itself. It's really important to emphasize that won't give us purpose. When you achieve it, you won't necessarily find that it gives your life meaning. You might actually find yourself suddenly perplexed and not know what to do. Enjoying the good things in life is essential to my purpose. Now, this is interesting because what it means is I'm focusing on myself, and myself, my own person, becomes my meaning independently. Now, this is interesting. This is a little bit like, the challenge with this belief is it's a little bit like a boomerang. When you throw the boomerang, when the hunter throws the boomerang, if he misses his target, what happens to the boomerang? It comes back to himself and he catches it again. Likewise, if we miss our mission in life, if we miss our purpose, we become a little bit like that boomerang, and our thoughts and attention come back to ourselves. And we then start to focus on ourselves in order to find meaning. But often what that means, if I'm doing that, it means, in fact, that maybe I've missed my purpose. I've missed my target. Now, let me give you some context for that as in a distributor context, in a distributor situation. Have you ever found that you've got a member of your downline who has been working hard, they struggle, they get disappointed, and they turn to you and they say, I need to take a step back. I need to take a step back and just focus on myself right now because this is taking too much energy. What they are in fact saying is, my efforts here are missing my target. What we need to do is, rather than suggest directing their attention to themselves, what we're doing there is perhaps directing their attention further away from their target than ever before. Maybe a slight adjustment, or maybe some persistence might in fact see them hit their target. Maybe a stronger throw or a better aim might see them hit the target versus see the boomerang come back on itself. I've got a story here I want to share. It's quite a funny one. And this is kind of in context of enjoying the good things and that principle. So I heard this joke. So a doctor meets one of his patients, and I'll stop the pause here for a second. A doctor meets one of his patients, and he asks him, how are you doing, Mr. Jones? How are you doing? And Mr. Jones says, I beg your pardon? You're going to need to speak up. I can't hear you very well. And he said, he says, your hearing's not too good. I think you've been drinking too much. If you stop drinking, then it'll improve your hearing. Right? So this is a joke, so obviously that doesn't happen in real life. So he sees his patient again a little while later. He bumps into him. And he says, oh, Mr. Jones, how are you doing? And he kind of speaks in a loud voice. And Mr. Jones says, oh, no need to shout. I can hear you fine. He goes, oh, clearly you've stopped drinking. Yes, I have, he says. Well, a few months pass on again, and he sees the doctor sees Mr. Jones again. And he says, how you doing, Mr. Jones? And he says, pardon? I can't hear you very well. And he goes, clearly you've started drinking again, haven't you? He says, yes, I have. He says, why did you do that? He says, when I stopped drinking, I could hear pretty good. But what I heard wasn't as good as whiskey tasted. Now, what is the point of that story? It actually has a moral to it. The moral is this. Let me read it out to you because I really like this. It says, since what he heard gave him no reason to be happy, he pursued happiness itself. Is that interesting? If what we're doing doesn't make us happy, then sometimes we pursue happiness as a means in itself. Now, why could this be a problem? This can be a challenge because if we pursue happiness as an end, the challenge is that we can get off purpose. And a meaningful life is a life that is a purposeful life, not one that is simply pleasurable in and of itself. He says here that cause, if he says a man, if he lacks a reason for pleasure, will provide himself with a cause, meaning he will do something to cause the pleasure when he doesn't have the meaning. What's the difference then between cause and meaning? He says, if you cut onions, you have no reason to weep, yet your tears have a cause. See the difference? There's a difference there, isn't there? So we want to make sure that what we do has a meaning, has a reason. If we don't do that, then we'll find ourselves getting taken off course in an attempt to find a cause for pleasure or for meaning somewhere else. And the challenge with that, the reason I emphasize this, is the pursuit of meaningful goals. The pursuit of a meaningful life is not a short-term race. It's not a 100-meter dash. It's a marathon. And that requires persistence. It requires determination, and it requires challenge. It requires effort. And it means that we need to perhaps have a little more persistence and determination than we might want from time to time. I say this to emphasize that sometimes we may get wearisome along the way. We may get frustrated or worn down, but I want to assure you that that's all right, that it's part of the course, it's part of the journey. When we strain, we sweat. When we put in a concerted, determined effort, we tire. And it's okay to pause. Rest if you must, but don't you quit. Yeah, that's what it's all about. So a couple more slides and then we'll complete my philosophy lesson for the day. So here we are. I'll put a couple of extra questions here, or a couple of extra thoughts. If I'm struggling right now, perhaps that means that I'm a failure or that I'm failing. Perhaps if what I'm doing right now isn't working, maybe I should quit. How many times do we hear a new person say that? Again, I say this not just in case you might be feeling the need to hear it, but what if you hear a new team member say that? What do we say? What do we help them do? If I'm not moving forward, I must not be getting closer. Now that might seem like a contradiction in itself. If I'm not moving forward, I might not be getting closer. Maybe we get closer by going upward versus forward. Again, a dimensional diagnosis might be required there. Maybe as we are striving, maybe as we are struggling, we might not seem like we're moving forwards, but that might be because we're moving upwards. And I have found as we become leaders, it's because we have climbed upwards, not necessarily forwards all the time. So I'll put here the solution then. What is the solution to these challenges that we face? What is a solution to some of these difficulties? The answer, I believe, is to find true meaning in what we, and I'm not talking just in a grand context of the meaning of life, but I'm talking in the context of the meaning of the moment. Meaning literally means what is meant, but it's what is meant by the person asking the question, or of the situation that implies the question. Therefore, meaning is something that we should find versus something we should create. We need to discover it versus invent it. That means that meaning for us is something that only we can answer. It is the question that only us as individuals can provide the answer to. I love this picture because life and moments can be very much like this. The sun is out, but there are also shadows. There is a beautiful sky, but there is also some barbed wire. There are some dark spots, but there are also beautiful rainbows. There is a bird that is perched, but it has the capacity to fly. There is so much meaning in that, isn't there? So much of a wonderful message that we can get from that, that many of our moments, I believe, can certainly be much like this picture. So, the questions that we should ask ourselves is this: if I am struggling right now, what does the moment require of me? Like I said, sometimes we climb upwards versus move forwards. Is my purpose or meaning to be found in equilibrium? If I'm finding my mission or my cause is requiring significant effort, strain, sweat, maybe even some blood and some tears, does that mean that I'm on the wrong path, or am I actually on track? If it is not to be found in equilibrium, then how should I respond to the challenges that I face? Or if my team members' cause and meaning is not found in equilibrium, how should they respond to the challenge? If I have a value that contradicts itself, how do I respond? How do I interpret it? For example, I might have a value that says hard work pays off, but my hard work is not paying off. How do I interpret that? How do I teach an explanation? How do I give a reason for that to someone else? Maybe it's in having what we've discussed today, a dimensional diagnosis, where maybe we need to look upwards for answers versus outwards for answers. Maybe we need to look three-dimensionally versus two-dimensionally at some of our challenges in order to find the real solutions. I love that principle that sometimes the answers to difficult questions are not found where the symptoms lie. They might be found somewhere else. And in order to get them, we need to look a little higher. Like I said before, think a little higher, act a little higher, Leadership is not always about moving forwards, it's about moving upwards. One of the key responsibilities of a leader is to be able to see what others don't and then share it with them so that they can catch the vision from where they stand. That means we need to be standing on higher ground. That means the answers that we find, the solutions that we find, are often standing on higher ground. So our task as distributors, as humans striving to be more, my invitation to each of us today is to stand on higher ground. And as we do that, recognize that getting there will take some effort. And when we get there, we might want to rest a little, and that's okay. But from that higher ground, we will see the answers to questions that when we were amongst the trees were difficult to understand. We couldn't see them. Maybe that cylinder was creating a rectangle and a circle, and we couldn't figure out how those two could come from the same source. How are we getting these different images and different situations that are contradicting themselves in my business or in my life? When we get to higher ground, we see that they don't contradict at all. But we need to get there to see it, yeah? And so that's my invitation. Recognize that as we pursue meaning in the moment, meaning in the day, meaning in the hour, we need to always seek the answer to that question. What is the meaning? What is this moment asking of me? And as we pursue that with the intent of standing on higher ground, I am confident we will make the right choices and we can help others to do the same. One of the great tasks of building a strong team is not in recruiting people. It's not in gathering lots of customers. It's in building the community, building the team, building people. And in order to build people, we definitely need to be standing on higher ground in order to do that. So let's get ourselves up there first so that we can lift versus try to push people up. Let's lift them up to where we're standing, but let's get there first. So that's my invitation. Today, let's make it a goal this week, this month, to get on higher ground. Ladies and gentlemen, I love you lots. I hope this has been of help. If you've been struggling this week or this month, I hope that what we've shared today gives some perspective that will give you a breath of relief and give you some encouragement. We love you lots. Have a great week, and we'll speak to you soon. Take care.